I'm George Galloway and I present Kalima Horra on Al Mayadeen television. Here we are in London. I speak my words freely, either in Parliament, on television, here on the streets of London. Kalima Horra means free word. That's what I speak. So Kalima Horra is a two-way conversation. Check it out on Al Mayadeen television. Welcome to Kalima Horra with me, George Galloway, on Al Mayadeen television. Coming to you from London, but discussing Afghanistan. After the beginning of the war in Afghanistan in 2001, the then Foreign Secretary of Britain, Jack Straw, rose in the House of Commons in February of 2002 and expressed the hope and indeed the belief that British forces would be home by Christmas. I rose in my place and told him, our soldiers will not be home 10 Christmases hence. Jack Straw laughed and he invited the whole Parliament to laugh with him. Oh, how they laughed. Well, they're not laughing now, any more than the government of the United States and the hundreds of thousands of American soldiers' families who've seen their sons and brothers and husbands go, some of them never to return from Afghanistan. The war on Afghanistan has been, in my view, an unmitigated disaster. By unmitigated, I mean no characteristic of it can be said to have been a success. And moreover, the very people that all these Western soldiers invaded Afghanistan so long ago to remove are about to return to power. As a matter of fact, very soon indeed. Because the proximate cause for this debate today is President Trump's declared intention, and I think we should believe him, to withdraw American forces finally from Afghanistan. I say finally because the Afghan war is the longest war the United States has ever participated in, longer even than the imbroglio, the bloody swamp of the war in Vietnam and Indochina. So if you fight a war that long, with that many casualties, costing that much money, and as soon as you leave, you're back to the status quo ante, that's got to be judged a complete failure, as I predicted it would be at the time. Just another of the occasions when yours truly got it right and our political masters got it entirely wrong. Now, we have an audience here of distinguished experts, one or two enthusiastic amateurs like myself, and we're going to try and drill down to get to the heart of the matter, which is this. Why did the United States fail in Afghanistan? Why did the British and other participants in the invasion and occupation of Afghanistan fail? And of course, just as importantly, what's going to happen next? So we have Afghans, we have distinguished scholars. Let's get on with the debate. Who'll speak first? Sir, why did the West fail in Afghanistan? Always assuming, of course, that you agree with my thesis that they did fail.
Well, I agree with your thesis, but there is another dimension to it, which is that in the words of Henry Kissinger, he said, it's irrelevant if US punishes enemies or not, but it definitely punishes its friends. And US is responsible for the 70,000 killings as a result of this invasion in Pakistan, $120 billion economic and infrastructure losses to Pakistan as a result of this war. 2.5 million refugees from the first war against the Soviets, and that continues in Turkey. US intervention in Iraq has caused the same kind of situation for Turkey, or 3 million refugees, infrastructure losses. So what we see from on the both sides, the US policy is damaging its friends. And that's what I said to the Turkish Prime Minister. I said, the problems you're having in your borders is not because of your enemies. You're having problems because of your friends. And the other side of the flip side of the Foreign Policy magazine published, the cost of war in Afghanistan was $28 billion a month, which is to find about 150 Al-Qaeda suspects. Now, that is a very huge cost to the US taxpayers. And the other side of it, that all this money who actually never leave USA, which has been promised for the Afghan, according to the Afghan ambassador. And they are saying all this money is parked in the offshore banking system or those corrupt financial systems which are available in this offshore banking. I believe that they are the people who are profiting from this war, and they are the people who are responsible for fueling these various kinds of conflicts to profit from it. Until you have these offshore banking system finished, it's unethical, immoral, and illegal. Until and unless we deal with it, we will not have any peace. For example, the Swiss banking system is designed on corruption. For example, if you put your money in, they charge you 2% and then they lend it on 4%. The Swiss banks are profiting from for doing nothing. So these are the financial institutions who are behind these fueling wars, and the cost of recovery of the US equipment in Afghanistan is much higher because the equipment they have transported in Afghanistan was not able to fight a guerrilla war. They had those big APCs. Even when Pakistan stopped the NATO supplies, the US requested that we would like, please, to have the nappies for our soldiers because they were using those nappies when they were fighting in Afghanistan. And you can imagine when a soldier cannot come out of his APC to have a pee, how difficult it is for them to work around. And at the time, the 70% of the Afghanistan was under Taliban control. We know the Italians and other forces were paying protection money to Taliban to have a peace. We know that British forces were having an agreement in Helmand province with the local Taliban. But when the US come and they were mining uranium from those mines, so the British said, okay, you want the mines? Okay, then you have the security as well. So this is a situation which is based on a corrupt system, which is costing lives and limbs of many innocent and civilian people. And nobody's talking about it.
Let me ask you just one more question. As we agree it has been a failure, the characteristics of the failure are on one level easy to see, but it is less well understood that opium production in Afghanistan is now far higher than it was before all this started. Am I right?
Well, in 2001, when the war started, the Drug Scope reported that the increase in the drug production was 14%. But now, as we speak now in 2019, the drug production has gone up to 40%. And that is about $30 billion worth of drugs have been transported from the Afghanistan, which is controlled by the US militarily. And about 30% of that money also goes to Taliban which is about 380 million. These are official figures which are presented in a LSE by a diplomat.
So now, 380 million what? A year goes to the Taliban?
Yes, because of this drug production. Plus,
quite good business.
Every truck enter into Afghan territory from Pakistan, the Taliban get paid $20,000 for the protection for that truck to leave the border and to reach to its destination. And they've been doing it for a long time. So the war in Afghanistan actually a big fraud, which is, and my friend, colleague from Canadian journalist, he told me that there are thousands and thousands of soldiers who go to Afghanistan to fight a war, but they actually never leave the base. They stay there, have 4 meals a day. On Thursday morning, they will have some security cleared traders who will bring their local carpets or whatever they sell to them. And after 6 months duty, they will go back to the US or wherever they come from. So the actual fact that this war is not the way it is, because there is no known enemy to fight with. And the equipment they are using is not designed to fight those enemies. It also proves that Americans, public, and the other have been conned.
Have been conned, yeah. You've taken the word right out of my mouth. Thank you very much for that. Sheik Helbawy, you are a distinguished Islamic scholar. I'd like to ask you, if I may, for the benefit of the international audience, for the ontology of the people who are involved in this fighting. What is the Taliban? How does it differ from Al-Qaeda and ISIS? What are the theological and therefore doctrinal political differences?
Thank you very much, George. And it's a very significant topic to discuss. Why I am saying that? Because unless the world understand the real issue in Afghanistan and the war, they will continue to be in a mess. Many lessons have been neglected. I lived in Afghanistan and Pakistan, as you know, and have very good relation with all the Mujahideen leaders, those who died and those who did not still alive. And in 1952, I came through a document in the British Library that the British government Foreign Office asked the British ambassadors in the area, what do you think about the advance of communism in the area after 1952 in Egypt, the revolution, and after Mossadegh in Iran, 1951. The astonishing answer came from the British Chargé des Affaires in Kabul. He said to them, to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, communism will never succeed in Afghanistan. This is number one. Number two, there will be no coup d'etat or a change of power unless someone from the same family. And you remember Zahir Shah, he ruled Afghanistan from 1933 to 1973. And then Sardar Dawood came in, and it was the road to the socialists and then the Soviet invasion. So it is not only an internal problem. Taliban is doing the same thing all the Afghan people were against. They were against the invasion from Russia, 1979. They were against the communist coup d'etat in 1978 in Kabul. And they were against the American invasion, if I say that, from 2001. The most important point I would like to say that the Taliban have their own version of Islam understanding. I have not seen it even in the Hanafi school of thought, which they are or should be adopting. It is something new. Human rights, women's rights, the extremism, but they are defending their country. And that's why the problem will continue if any foreign power would think of coming to Afghanistan. The mountains are fighting with Taliban. The people are happy with Taliban, although are not satisfied with their understanding of Islam, the way they understand Islam. So the results will be catastrophic. More if the Americans will not go out from Afghanistan. The Americans nowadays on the international scene, as you know, all of you know, have failed in their trial to oppress the Islamic Republic in Iran. And they have failed in Afghanistan, and they are trying to talk to Taliban. Taliban was the worst enemy, more than Al-Qaeda, more than ISIS. But after the death of Osama bin Laden and the fading shape of Al-Qaeda, ISIS came up, but now they are as well fading down. They are being defeated in Syria, in Iraq, in Egypt as well, in some other parts. But the Americans should learn the lesson that the British understood since 1952. To live in a peaceful world, we have to be friends, we have to be brothers, we have to respect each other, we have to value the other people's traditions, because you can't oblige people like the Afghans to forget their traditions. The problem in the future, I'm saying to my friends here, the problem in the future is not America. The problem in the future is the political instability in Afghanistan.
Just lastly, before the break, this unique interpretation of Islam which you say the Taliban have developed, how does it differ from the pan-Islamist Al-Qaeda ISIS phenomenon? And insofar as it differs, does that make it a legitimate negotiating partner? After all, I certainly always argued in Parliament that we can negotiate a settlement with the Taliban because all they want is control over their own territory. They have no interest in anyone else's territory, let alone the length of women's skirts in Copenhagen or the sex scene in Soho. They are interested only in their own country. And that makes them negotiable, don't you think?
I do agree 100% that they are local and they concentrate on Afghanistan. But Al-Qaeda and ISIS and some other groups claim that they are international and they are supported by foreign powers and local powers. The many hands involved in the Afghanistan war and jihad will spoil the unfortunately for some time what we call peace. Peace is not withdrawal, and Americans are not happy with the word withdrawal. They want to keep their dignity more and more. It is failure and withdrawal, and they sought it, but peace is something else. Peace is in culture, peace is in education, peace is in development. Why? I am asking myself long time ago, and I knew the Afghans long time ago, since the 50s. I have very good relation with Harun Mujaddidi, who lived in Egypt and was a member of Muslim Brotherhood and was put in prison during the time of Nasser, although he is an Afghan. And his brother Hashim Mujaddidi and Wahidullah is still alive in Germany now. Han Rabbani, I was putting him in one room beside me to stay in 1973 and 4 and 5. I remember one very important point for Burhan. He visited Saudi Arabia and the Arab world in 1973 to 1976. And he tried to explain to them that the communists will invade Kabul after a short time. Although it was only 3, 4, 5 years, and really the communists came to Kabul, as we all know. All of that. Why? Why America consider herself the elder sister or brother or father of the world? Why? Why we are not talking about human rights in that sense? Most of the delegation or 5 members of the delegation who is in Qatar, in the office in Qatar, and negotiating with the Americans now, we're in Guantanamo Bay. If this is right to have in the 21st century a prison like that, Americans should be wise. Americans should treat other people like their brothers, friends, equal, and the West in general should look at that. We should develop the Arab world, and we should develop Afghanistan in the beginning. The money that has been spent on wars and rockets and tanks
And corruption.
and corruption is local inside, but I am talking about the money paid to continue the war could build all the world for the 3rd millennium, not only for a decade or two.
Let's take the gentleman in the middle. We mustn't let the front benches hog the show. Go ahead, sir.
To talk about the suffering of the people of Afghanistan, they're far more qualified to do that. But coming back to why the US lost, we can look at it because from this way, that militarily they were very strong, but they didn't have a focus on what they wanted to achieve. What were the outcomes? First, it was we're going to smoke them out of their holes.
Democracy,
Yeah.
human rights, women's rights.
The
that's
target,
what they
the target
told
kept
us.
changing. The target kept changing. You know, first they were going to smoke them out of their holes and get rid of Al Qaeda. It was nothing to do with Taliban. And then they said, oh no, we have to get rid of Taliban because they're hosting them. Then it turned into nation building. And then 2003, they start invading Iraq and take their focus off Afghanistan, which they haven't even completed yet. Then in 2004, they release Abdullah Masood and sent from Guantanamo Bay, no less, and send him back to South Waziristan. And he starts the dreaded TTP, and the focus shifts to Pakistan. And then they start blaming Pakistan, which is the only route they had into Afghanistan in the first place. They start blaming Pakistan and push their war, their failures onto Pakistan. And then they start this drone bombing campaign. And then they start surges, and then it's about stopping opium. Then it's about nation building again. They didn't have a clear focus of what they wanted to achieve and at what point they were going to get out. They went in, and like Iraq, they did the same thing in Afghanistan. They had no exit strategy. They didn't know when they wanted to leave. And then the deep state said, actually, we might want to stay here because we can look at China from here. We can look at Russia from here. We can keep an eye on Pakistan from here. We can destabilize Iran from here. So even now, as Donald Trump is, rapidly trying to get out of Afghanistan, there is a deep state in America which is trying to keep American bases and American military presence and intelligence presence in Afghanistan for as long as possible because they want to use that as a base for future operations. It's difficult. And then they wanted to bring India in. They spent many years trying to convince India to send its military into Afghanistan, which India said, okay, we'll spend some money and redevelop Afghanistan, but we'll never send any military over there because it's a futile exercise. So that's one of the main reasons why they failed, because they didn't know
Perhaps the
what they
Indian
wanted to
government
achieve.
asked their mother, as I'll
Yeah.
never forget that quote. Thank you for that. On the discomforting thought of Donald J. Trump as the father of the world, we'll take a break. I'll be right back. You're watching Kalima Horra with me, George Galloway, on Al Mayadeen Television, coming from London, talking about Afghanistan. Earlier, we took the Kalima Horra camera onto the streets of London to see what the people thought. Take a look.
Do you think the US has won or lost the war in Afghanistan?
I think it's pretty clear that it's lost it long since.
I would say that it hasn't been won or lost. I think a war that's been going on for that amount of time, I don't think you can really calculate whether it's been won or lost.
I don't know what was happening, but there was a lot of refugees when I used to be in Pakistan.
Unfortunately, in this situation, there's no clear-cut rule about winning or losing. The Afghan people are the ones who have lost. It's not a question of Americans gaining. Strategically, they have achieved their goal of having an input into Afghanistan, but with the Taliban resurgent and now entering peace talks, I don't think the Americans have won.
The war has been going on for about 18 years now. What do you think's been achieved in Afghanistan, if anything?
Very, very, very little. A lot of cronyistic money has been sloshed around here and there.
I think they've gone back in time, but now there's been a lot of developments. I hope there is something good happening over there, because I myself am a dentist and I had colleagues over there, and they moved back to their country to serve the country because they knew that it has suffered a lot.
The country is still facing a lot of problems, still facing the problem of terrorism, and still facing problem of poverty. And I think that there is no achievements because the war brought more and more problems for Afghanistan.
Sadly, nothing has been achieved. At least the Soviets aren't there, which is a good thing, and at least the Taliban have gone out of power, but unfortunately the Taliban are still quite strong.
Why do you think the opium production volume has increased 4 times under the US occupation than it was during the Taliban era?
There were controversies that they themselves were growing it for the army was doing. Their people were doing it. The US wasn't, but the army who were posted over there, they were involved in it. And I remember there was a documentary as well that emerald trade was very high. These US Marines were carrying emeralds and selling it in the US, something like that.
I think the problem is there's a lot of corruption. Independent warlords have arisen and they're making money from the opium. At least with the Taliban at one stage they tried to cut down the opium production. But even the Taliban controlled areas, they make money from opium.
Quite a bit of common sense there on the streets of London. Asif, you're Afghan. I've known you, seems like, half our lives since this began. Do you share this analysis from most of the people anyway in the Vox Pops and most of the people here in the studio so far?
I mean, obviously, the war has been lost in Afghanistan, but more importantly, I would like to say is that the Afghan people are the loser once again because the Afghan people are not involved in the peace negotiation. It is one brutal country against another brutal organization, who both kill innocent Afghans in Afghanistan, which is the facts. Maybe a lot of people don't agree with me, but that's the reality on the ground in Afghanistan. Even, in the past week, hundreds of innocent Afghans has been killed. But to come to the American war in Afghanistan in 1998, it wasn't to do with 9/11. There was a meeting in Germany where Britain, America, Iran, Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia, they were invited when the gas pipeline from the Central Asia to go through Afghanistan and Pakistan and somewhere else, when that contract was not awarded to the Americans, so they had a meeting to remove the Taliban. And while the current negotiator, Zalmay Khalilzad, he told the Bush families that the Taliban are not like the Iranian Akhund, they are like the sheikhs of Saudi. Afghanistan will flourish under them. So that was his advice then at that time. And if you remember the coming to the history of Afghanistan, when Ronald Reagan, when he visited Pakistan, a refugee camp, Nasarbagh, he was chanting Allahu Akbar and he said, "We are with you against the Soviets." And he went to the Afghanistan-Pakistan border and he pointed, "That's your country and go and reclaim it from the Soviets." So that's how the Americans started in Afghanistan. But if you look at the current history right now in Afghanistan, American are the biggest loser in Afghanistan. The current expenditure in Afghanistan is $49 billion. They have tested every sort of weapons in Afghanistan, including the mother of all bombs, which was dropped in my area, not far from my village, just about 6 or 7 miles from my village.
The biggest bomb since Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Yeah. So every single weapons, I don't really agree with my colleague that, weapons were not tried. Every single weapon, including B-52, latest jet fighters, latest weapons, now even currently the American soldiers are having personal drones, to go and check the areas, given each soldiers in the south of Afghanistan. But coming to the point is, that yes, the Americans have lost the war, but there is a mega project coming to Afghanistan, will be the Islamic State, to destabilize Iran with the support of the Americans. So that's for sure. The Taliban will be busy, if they come to power in Afghanistan, they'll be busy fighting the Islamic State. And then the Afghans will be the losers again. But again and again, killing innocent people, coming on international television, and boasting that if I want to remove Afghanistan, from the world map, it will take me just 10 days, but I have to kill 10 million people. That is even a Hitler. I don't know whether I should compare him to a Hitler or compare him to Mussolini, or I don't know who do I compare Mr. Trump. When you come and you're the leader of the free world and you're boasting on an international platform, saying that if I want to remove a nation which have proud history, he should have an advice from his mother. I don't know when his mom passed away. Anyone who goes to Afghanistan, seek your mother advice first, like Alexander the Great, he asked his mother, should I stay or should I come? And the mom said, they are crazy people, just leave. It's not only the Taliban, who are fighting the American and British and NATO resistance in Afghanistan. It is the Afghan people. Every war in Afghanistan is not won by the Afghan governments. Because as you know, and I know, and everyone knows, the Afghan governments are corrupt. They are murderer. And the war was, from the very first day, it was lost in Afghanistan when the Bonn Agreement was declared. So the American regime plus Britain and NATO empower the most vicious warlords, thugs, rapists, thieves, genociders, who are the remnants of the former Mujahideen and who are still currently in power. And some of them are having millions of their taxpayers' money, British and American, investing in London. And probably one of them is that he was a minister for Hajj. He stole the Afghan money and invested in Britain, and he was a minister. But
it's circular.
Yeah, it's circular. But the problem is not only the Afghan regime or the American or the Taliban. It is always any imperialist power who tried to invade Afghanistan. The resistance was led by the people. I was working in Kandahar from 2011 until 2012, and then I moved to Kabul, and I saw with my eyes. The way the foreign invaders treated innocent Afghans on the street, you will not even treat a dog in that manner. If you are trying to win, the logo was to win the minds and what was that logo? The hearts and minds of the people. So that's not the way. If you are bombing my family 3 o'clock in the morning and I don't even find the flashes in the bones of my family members, I have no choice. I have to join either Taliban or join another organization which fights against the foreign invasion. But to make it clear, and I don't agree with one of your guests, that Taliban are very good people. No, they're killing innocent Afghans on a daily basis.
He didn't say that.
Yeah,
as said they were only interested in their own country.
As the American and the British and others are killing innocent Afghan. But again and again, if we come to the bottom line, it's the poor Afghan people who are losing once again, because none of them is involved in peace negotiation. They're not even asked, what sort of regime would you prefer? What sort of government would you prefer? What sort of employment, jobs, what sort of life would you prefer? But it's just somewhere in Doha, some undercover, some groups.
You could have had the negotiation at Guantanamo Bay.
Exactly.
Well, there. Yes, the gentleman in the middle, then the gentleman at the end with the magnificent hairdo.
Thank you, George. I have to start with saying that Afghans as a nation have been very resilient. We have always been hopeful to trust, and we again trusted the world, but they betrayed us as usual. But the Afghans are still resilient. They're looking forward for peace, and they're looking forward for having all things that they lost in this political or globalized war in Afghanistan. But again, after 40 years, the nation is really tired. They're shouting peace, they're shouting for a place where they can live. It's either their country, their land, or their local village. As an Afghan who have been a refugee all my life, since I see the world, I've been going up and down and ended up in England finally, which I'm grateful. It's my second home and I feel safe, have everything. Again, when it comes to Afghanistan, let's not focus on who are the Taliban, what are the Taliban, why they're there. They're there, they exist. This is the reality of Afghanistan. But how the world, mainly US, get involved in Afghanistan? Long ago, there was a meeting. Many Afghan specialists were invited, including myself, asking, we're leaving Afghanistan. We are planning to leave Afghanistan. This is your country. Help us to exit. I was the first one who raised my question. Did you guys ask us before going into Afghanistan? Did we give you the strategy of entering Afghanistan? Did you sit with us? Did you plan with this nation? No. So why should we offer you guys the exit strategy now? Find a route that you went in and find a route to leave the country. But their point was, we don't want to leave Afghanistan in failure. Well, you do it or not, but the failure is there.
A blind man can see.
So on the other hand, we're at the moment, we as a nation focusing for peace. We're really not wanting to talk about war. We're really not wanting to talk about terrorism. But in terms of giving, Afghans have given a lot to the world against the communism, against the globalized terrorism, and everything you see. Today, the Middle Eastern countries, the Arab world, should be thankful to Afghan nation. We stood against the communism. They were not there to convert Afghans into communists. They were there to step on Afghanistan, get the regional power, and have a strategy and focus on the Middle Eastern and the Arab world oil. That's where the Americans felt, okay, it's time for us to get it. And coming back to the comments of Sheikh, I very respect with him, with the issue of that, what the Taliban are, how they think, how they interpret Islam. But the Mujahideen leaders were Al-Azhar University educated people. Why they waged a war, a jihad, against a political issue in the region? Okay, they said we are fighting for freedom. The country is free. The communists left. So why are you going to kill your people? Why are you destroying your roads, your bridges? Is this what interpretation of Islam told them at Al-Azhar University? Mujaddidi, Rabbani, all these names have been mentioned. They have clear records of human rights violation, killing thousands of people. So what is the difference between him and the Taliban? Nothing.
Let me hear from the gentleman on the end, yeah.
Thank you very much. Coming first to the answer of the question, did US win or lose? They had certain achievements, and one of the achievements for the US is the being in the heart of Asia. And because of the issues they have got with Russia, that's why the only thing Afghanistan has got is the location. So they are here. So once they came in here in 2001, then the initial thing they wanted to do was build a ring road, which is connecting Kabul to Mazar, to Herat, to Kandahar, which is going in circle. And the cost was 1.5 billion for that. They wanted to do that, and then in 2003, their priorities changed. So they went to Iraq. So the number of people they had in Afghanistan was about 21,000 at that time in 2003, and they increased in Iraq to 148,000. So the reason they lost the war in Afghanistan, or they lost in Afghanistan, was because their priority changed. And also, other things that the US could do during this time for 19 years, they could have invested in the system in Afghanistan, which they never did. So if they can, 40%, as my colleague mentioned, that 40% opium has increased, they could have done so many ways to do these changes in Afghanistan. They could have made a system to catch where the opium is and how to find it and how to fight against it. The money that was invested in Afghanistan, they all went back to the US and other countries. I was working in 2010 there. So they had 3 categories of people working. They had expats, they had OCNs, which are called other country nations, and they had LNs. So an LN, for example, the salary would be around $300 or $500. On the other hand, an expat salary was $10,000, starting from $10,000, going to $15,000. They didn't pay any tax, which means any project that was donated for Afghanistan, majority of the money, 70-80%, went back to the US or other Western countries. So in fact, it's all about investing in the system, which they never did. It's a place, in other words, I can say, it's a business for them to make money from Afghanistan.
Yeah. I'll say at the end what I think about all this. Adam, Garrie, you're also a scholar, not a religious scholar, but a historical scholar. You know from Alexander the Great onward that nobody successfully occupied Afghanistan. So in the absence of their mothers, they could have asked you what was likely to happen if we send huge foreign armies to occupy Afghanistan. I'm right, no?
Indeed. What happened in 2001 was such a tragedy that it was both farcical and tragic simultaneously. The United States knew full well that the Mujahideen were able, with or without the US weapons expedited the process, but with or without those weapons, the Mujahideen, with their fraternal allies in Pakistan, would have beat the Soviet invasion. And what did the US do? Only a few short years later, from 1989, when the war ended, to 2001. They did the same thing, only with a worse strategy, because they couldn't even define the victory, or because the US didn't know history. But forgetting Alexander the Great, I wouldn't expect a country that produced Bill Clinton and Donald Trump to know that, but they could have at least known the history of Ronald Reagan and of Jimmy Carter and of Leonid Brezhnev, whose brain had been eviscerated by alcohol in the last 3 years of his rule. They could have known their own history, but they made the mistakes of their own enemy, and that is the way that all empires will fall.
How interesting. Sir, you are a journalist who has covered these events widely. I wanted to ask you about Doha. How likely are these talks to succeed? What is the basis on which we'll see this agreement reached? What will the agreement be?
Thanks, Mr. Galloway, for asking this crucial points about the peace agreement between the Taliban and the US in Doha. Do you remember in 2002, the Qatar royal family asked the Karzai, please invite the Taliban on the peace negotiation in the Bonn conference to try to settle this problem. You never win, because they know the Karzai family. We know them from his father, his family, and his family records. But the Karzai rejected that one. He said, we never let them, and we will never participate in to talk with them. They are a terrorist. And today, he went to the Moscow and talked with them under the Russian sponsorship conference. This is a very shame. On that time, he said they are a terrorist, and today said he embraced.
Well, that's normal, isn't it? They're always terrorists until you negotiate. Then it's tea with the Queen at Buckingham Palace.
And he embraced with the Mullah brother before he was in the Guantanamo Bay. He asked Americans, he asked so many times the George Bush, don't release him. He's the most dangerous enemy, not only for the U.S. national interest and for entire the Muslim world. But in the Moscow, he embraced him and he kissed his face. Look at that one. Now, behind the scenario, now he's persuaded another the Doji politician in Kabul. It's very sorry to say they are political leaders. They lose their credit in Afghanistan. You know, all of them.
Do you think they should not be negotiating with the Taliban?
No, we should not. But the people, technocrats... You
want to fight them forever then?
No, we should ignore them because they were involved during the Russian invasion, during the civil war in Kabul when the Mujahideen came to Kabul. I was in Kabul. I live in my house on the front line between the Sayaf group and Shia group. I was a witness on that time because they killed only 60,000 innocent people in Afghanistan. Today, they said we'll never kill this one. They don't blame each other. They said we are clear. And how can you talk with them? They are warlords. They are criminals.
Well, I mean, of course, I understand how you feel. But you either go on fighting someone forever or you talk to them.
No, we are tired. The people, they are said we want to talk, but the people, they are optimistic about the Qatar peace talkings.
Do you think it will reach a successful conclusion?
But we are sure they will be reached because I follow all the Trump debates and her tweets. And the 2nd of January 2019, in the first session of his cabinet, I recorded in my email that one. He said, I want to leave Afghanistan because we spend $5.4 billion for nothing in Afghanistan. We need this money to in our own country for our infrastructure projects we needed. Why do you waste our money?
Let's take the gentleman behind you with the baseball cap.
Firstly, thank you for this wonderful opportunity and to be here with such great minds and thinkers. I'd just like to add some more nuance to this political arena we are at the moment, which is that using the term USA is a good term, but I don't think it's totally helpful because the individuals involved, like Tony Blair and Bush and other characters around them, these people are Christian, fundamentalist Christians, and they have their own vision of the world. And I think it's a bit unfair bringing all of USA in on their very narrow-minded and extremely horrific ideas, which is basically perpetual war. So in Afghanistan, as other countries as well, their perpetual war there is a victory, because it's not these rich individuals, these Christian elites, the ones that are paying for the war. It is the poor and the middle class in America, the taxpayer. They're the ones paying for this small, tiny little Christian elite set on top of America, attacking other countries across the world. And their vision is perpetual war. So it's a great success because it's a taxpayer. And who pays the taxes? Not the rich. They never pay their taxes. It is the poor.
Christians believe in the prophets, peace be upon them. The politicians you mentioned believe in the prophets and how to get a bigger piece of them. Let's take finally the gentleman with the beard in the middle, you sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. George, from this particular program. We just want to talk about how is the peace process between the American and Taliban in Qatar. I was a young person from the United Kingdom to be into that program when they invited Afghans from the Afghan community. I've been to that program particularly. Those people who are sitting in there in the Qatar, Doha, representing the Taliban, we can say they are actually representative of the Taliban main group because they were the group who has exchanged with the American forces who was captured in Host province. And those people, I think is the Qatar delegation before the previous director of their office, Tayyib, he did that delegation with the American. That means they have influence in the internal Taliban or the external Taliban or wherever they are. They can progress in that, particularly in the peace process. That means, like as a journalist brother mentioned, we should ignore it or we should not talk. That's absolutely clear. The war is, American lost this war in Afghanistan. All the world community lost this war. That's absolutely clear. We can see because American nowadays came to talk negotiation, not the Taliban. Taliban appeal, we remember that's the news. Taliban appeal many years ago, as Sheikh mentioned that as well, and other brothers mentioned that as well. They applied to negotiation, but nobody accepted at that time. But now American want to talk. That means they're looking a proper exit to how they can go out from Afghanistan. That's why it's a positive step. They should come out and they should leave Afghans alone to settle their own problem between each other.
Thank you. Asif, just before you speak, let me put my thesis to you. I don't expect there's anyone in this room who agrees with it. But it is my view, and I must put it. The Western countries used Afghanistan. Yes. They didn't care anything about Afghanistan, still less about Afghans. They used it to weaken and eventually bring down the Soviet Union. And you've been paying the price ever since. You paid it in the immediate aftermath with the internecine savagery that I talked about. You paid it under the rule of the obscurantist Taliban. You paid it when they invited in and gave succor and comfort to even more extreme Islamist factions like ISIS, or rather Al-Qaeda, which morphed into ISIS. And now, after all this suffering and all this blood, you're actually about to turn the page back to a period which was itself extremely dark. I told Mrs. Thatcher on the eve of the fall of Kabul, forgive me, Doctor, that you have opened the gates for the barbarians, and a long dark night will now descend upon Afghanistan. I still believe I was right. Over to you, last word.
You're quite right, but the biggest problem in Doha right now is two issues. One is the Taliban are saying, give us a deadline, when are you leaving? That's already agreed. I think September is the month where Trump is going to travel to Afghanistan, and that's for definite. And also, Taliban will not use Afghanistan against foreign states. But again and again, our suffering will still continue, because this is just, in Afghanistan, there's a proverb, saying that you're putting a muddy nose for yourself, so, people don't see that you have no nose, So you're just putting a muddy nose so that, you can exit Afghanistan and thinking that we have not lost the war.
Well, look, unfortunately, time is up, indeed, beyond up. But trust me, this issue isn't going to go away, and we'll be discussing it again. I've been George Galloway. This has been Kalima Horra in London on Afghanistan. Thanks for watching.